Fight fans, welcome to the PBC podcast, brought to you by Premier Boxing Champions with your host, Kenneth Bouhairie and Michael Rosenthal.
Welcome, everyone, to the PBC podcast. I'm Kenneth Bouhairie, and he is USA Today boxing junkie editor Michael Rosenthal. Thank you for joining us. As always, we've got a lot to get into this week. Eimantas Stanionis will be joining us, as well as Emmanuel Rodriguez. Plus, we've got some good topics on our PBC toe-to-toe segment. You're definitely going to want to check that out. But first, Mike, boxing is back this week. Featherweight titleist Shakur Stevenson returns versus Felix Caballero, I believe is his name.
Caraballo.
There you go. Obviously a very popular fighter in a 130-pound contest. And by the time you listen to this, you would have already known who won. And to be honest with you, so do we already, because I'd be surprised if this one goes the distance, let alone Caraballo doing anything of note. How do you see it, Mike?
I like that segue. I'm excited. It's been 3 months since there's been any fights in the United States, and I'm happy to see a rising young guy like Stevenson, showcased. If you recall, Stevenson was supposed to defend his 126-pound title against Miguel Mariaga on March 14th, and it was canceled 2 days before the fights. I think that's the main reason that he ended up being the first guy back. Okay, to answer your question though, so he's fighting a guy who's like almost completely unknown, and it'll be at 130 pounds, so his title won't be at stake. You know what? I think this is, again, I think it's just a showcase. I don't think they were really concerned about how competitive it was for what that's worth. I think maybe they're banking on the fact that people are just so excited to see boxing return that they don't care that much. Stevenson will look good. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and I get it. I mean, it's the first fight back. You want to make sure you cross your T's, dot your I's, and so forth. So you don't want to blow it on a huge fight. But I tell you one thing that I was saddened to hear was Michaela Meyer testing positive for COVID-19. It's got to be disappointing for her to go through that camp only for this to happen. So one, we wish her well and full recovery, of course. Mike, I was really looking forward to that because, as you and I talked about off the podcast, I know her scheduled opponent, Helen Joseph. I've seen her train in Ghana. I've been following her career. She's battled through a lot of tough circumstances, had some good wins, some tough losses, and this was her moment. So I guess I'm sorry to see her miss out on such a big opportunity.
Well, for her sake, maybe she got on the radar, and now she'll get the next fight, something along those lines. I certainly hope so. You mentioned another thing that I wanted to mention, that this is will give us an idea what the sport will look like for the time being. No spectators, all kinds of precautions because of the coronavirus pandemic, and the fact that Mayer tested positive for COVID-19 and was removed kind of showed that it worked. Whatever precautions they were taking worked, because she's off the card. I'll be curious to see how it plays out without a live audience, just what it looks like, what it sounds like. Maybe it won't sound much different at all. I don't know. We'll see. I did take a peek at the UFC fights, and it seemed just like normal, really. But we'll see what it's like for boxing. And the broadcasters won't even be at the event, so that's something different also. It should be an interesting night.
Yeah, it should be. And I'm obviously bigger boxing fan than UFC fan, so I'll have a different approach to viewing these fights on Tuesday night, and I'm curious to see how it plays out as well. Now, in other news, undefeated multi-division champion Canelo Alvarez is, tell me if you've heard this before, still in search of an opponent. I feel like we say this every time he's going to fight or soon to announce a fight. But two names have been thrown out there. Keith Thurman of BoxingScene.com reported that two-time super middleweight champion Andy Ruiz is a potential opponent for Canelo. And Mike Coppinger says middleweight contender Sergey Derevyanchenko, who we had on the podcast last week, is also a possibility versus Canelo, albeit at 160 pounds. Mike, let's start with Derevyanchenko. What are your thoughts on that matchup?
Well, first, I think both of them are legitimate opponents for Canelo. Derevyanchenko has that amateur background. He's tough as hell, as we saw against Golovkin. He's sort of a proven commodity with close losses to Danny Jacobs and Golovkin. The problem for Derevyanchenko might be weight. I'm not sure. He might be at a disadvantage if the fight's contested at 168. Although I'm only presuming he's the naturally smaller guy. I just somehow would feel better if that fight took place at 160. I have a feeling it won't.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it. Coppinger did mention 168. Now, 160, I feel like Derevyanchenko should already have been a world champion. I thought he beat Gennady Golovkin for the vacant IBF belt last year. Instead, he lost by close decision. I didn't think it was a robbery. It was a very close fight. Could have gone either way. I just scored it for Derevyanchenko. And I feel like Derevyanchenko versus Canelo at 160, that's a great fight.
Right. Yeah.
At 168, I'm not as big a fan. I'm just not sure that's an ideal weight for Derevyanchenko. Like you, I have reservations. Canelo has campaigned as high as 175. So I think Derevyanchenko would be at a severe disadvantage at anything above 160. Now, what about Durrell? He is coming off the TKO loss versus David Benavidez, but he's a sturdy 168-pounder. Is he a viable option?
I think he is. I find that a fascinating possibility. As you just alluded to, Durrell's a talented, proven veteran, albeit one who's sort of in the last part of his career. I thought he gave a pretty good performance against a top 168-pounder in David Benavidez before he had to quit because of a cut. I think Durrell still has something left, and I think he's a legitimate 168-pounder, which could work in his favor against Canelo. Two things, though. One, I wonder whether Canelo would demand a lower catch weight, say 164, which could work against Durrell. I'm just sort of presuming that that's a possibility. And two, Durrell is now prone to getting cut, as we know. I could see that happening again and kind of ruining the whole thing. But I think that's a good matchup for Canelo, an interesting fight for Canelo. Durrell's the real deal.
Yeah, the danger for Durrell is obviously the cuts, I think, aside from Canelo's elite skill set. But really, the cuts are the true danger for Durrell. The rest of the danger, I feel, lies in Canelo. I wouldn't sleep on Durrell at all. You mentioned it. The fight versus Benavidez was close and competitive up until that bad cut emerged over Durrell's eye. And if he can box like that, if he can box the way he did versus Benavidez, then he's going to pose some serious problems for Canelo. I also think that he's a bigger name, bigger box office draw than a lot of people are giving him credit for. I mean, he's drawn well on the networks. He draws a crowd, and he's well known in the hip hop and entertainment world. I mean, the guy has Shaq coming to big fights and so forth. So I think folks underestimate him in that regard. But I did want to, great story and a great humanitarian. All the things that he's doing for the city of Flint. And I mean, he hosted an esports event a few weeks ago. He had a host of NFL players participating. Errol Spence participated. Adrian Broner participated. So he certainly draws the big names out there. But one thing I wanted to ask you, if you had your choice, looking at all the names from middleweight to light heavyweight, from 160 to 175 pounds, who would you like to see Canelo face next?
I can go up to 175. See, it's easy if I can go up to 175.
I already know where you're going. I already know where you're going. But consider also name value, and
come on, I want him to fight Bouhairie. That's the guy. If I get to include 175, that's the guy I want to see him fight, because I'm not sure he'd win that fight, which is how it's supposed to be. With Canelo, he's dancing around all these guys, and he's better than all these guys. He's probably not going to really have much of a chance of losing any of these fights. I want to see him in a fight against a guy who I think could actually beat him, and that's Bouhairie and maybe one or two other 175 pounders.
Is there anyone at 160 to 168 that you think would have a chance against Canelo?
I think there's somebody at 160 I think would have a chance against Canelo, and that's Jamal Charlo.
Yeah, that's a great fight at 160.
And I have just loved the idea of that fight for a long, long time. I'd pick Canelo to win the fight, but I think that's let's put it this way. I like all these fights, actually.
Yeah, me too.
Fun to watch, but I think that would be better than any of the ones that we've discussed, except for the 175 pounders. I mean, if he really had balls, if he really wanted to challenge himself, he would fight Bouhairie or again one or two of the other 175 pounders. Though that would be absolutely fascinating, but it's a huge risk. It's almost too much to ask.
Yeah, it's certainly a huge risk, and maybe it is. I think Canelo will have to be a little more settled in at 175, maybe take a couple of more fights. But Canelo Alvarez fears no man, as far as
It's
I'm
true.
concerned. I do think Caleb Plant, David Benavidez, also great fights for him. Any of the 168 pounders and 175 pounders. Jamal Charlo at 160. But let me throw out a name for you, which a fight that I would think would be reasonably fairly easy to make, and that's Demetrius Andrade. I mean, the guy is available.
I don't think
He's,
anybody wants to fight him. I think
I
he's too
guess
awkward.
so.
He's just
You know,
too awkward. He's one of those guys you win, you probably won't look good when winning. It's going to be a pain in the ass, that kind of thing. And you could lose. I think he's really good.
I think so. I think he's really good as well. I'm not convinced that he can beat the upper crust. I'm not convinced if he's part of that upper crust. It's such an easy fight to make. He's on the same platform. In fact, he joined that platform to get these type of fights, and he's been screaming for a big name supposedly. I don't know what's stopping that fight from happening. Perhaps it's what you say, but none of these guys really are easy outs. Billy Joe Saunders isn't an easy out. Jamal Charlo wouldn't be an easy out. Caleb Plant, David Benavidez, all those guys have a great chance of beating Canelo Alvarez. Arthur Beterbiev, obviously.
They have a decent chance. They have a chance. I'll stop it. They have a chance of beating him.
Who do you think?
With Beterbiev, I would probably favor Beterbiev. So that's a difference.
That's getting awfully close to I want to see Canelo lose.
Yeah, well, I wanted to see him where it's a 50-50 fight. Yeah,
I hear what you're saying, and I think that's a tough fight. Again, I don't count Canelo Alvarez out against anyone. That said, I do think that there are some 161, 168 pounders that could conceivably beat him, and I would make Beterbiev the favorite over Canelo Alvarez, given what he's already accomplished at that weight and his elite skill set, power, everything. I really like.
It's almost not fair to Canelo for me to say that, but it's what I want to see. I want to see him in a fight where I think the other guy's got a really good chance of winning, and it's a compliment. In a way, it's a compliment to Canelo, because what I'm saying is that there are a lot of good fights at 160 and 168. A lot of these are top elite guys. They're capable of beating anybody, right? Including Canelo. But Canelo's a big favorite against all those guys, and that's a compliment to him. That's how good he is.
Yeah, exactly. Although I give David Benavidez and Caleb Plant, I think are
they would have
serious test for Canelo Alvarez. If Danny Jacobs.
There's a reason though that I'm sorry to interrupt you. There's a reason that Benavidez said that's a fight he wants 2 or 3 years down the line. Though he told us that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's because I think he wants more seasoning. He wants to maybe build his name. That's probably part of it. I think that's part of it also. I think that a year from now, or even if Benavidez fights Canelo, maybe Benavidez is like even the favorite, that kind of thing, if he keeps winning fights.
Right. Of course, hopefully by then he would have fought Caleb Plant. So let's say
the winner of that fight is even bigger. Yeah,
I would love to see the winner of that fight versus Canelo Alvarez.
That's perfect.
Super duper fight.
I'm in. There. I like that.
Love that fight. Yeah. All right, we gotta move on from all of these hot takes. When it comes to Canelo, we could just keep going. But let's jump into our first interview with undefeated welterweight prospect Eimantas Stanionis. Eimantas, thank you for joining us. How is everything in Lithuania?
Everything is crazy, like in all world, So this coronavirus did very bad thing for fighters and, for the people.
Has it affected the way you guys are, places you've been able to go and so forth? Are you guys on lockdown?
Yeah, it was locked down, but now we can go like almost everywhere. But still, there is like no sport events or no music events. But we can go like to the restaurants, to the shopping malls.
I see. What about the gym? Have you been able to work out at all there?
Yes, it was like completely closed for about 4 or 5 weeks, and then they opened the gyms for like professional fighters. So I started the training, but I was training in outside.
Hey, Matas, also I wanted to ask you about the protests we see here in the U.S. related to the death of George Floyd. What were your thoughts on that? What has the reaction been over there?
Yeah, it's the same, like it's my country is small, but still they affected here too. So it's crazy, that's happening, and people like look at the color of the people. It's not a good thing. It's very bad. We all the same. It's the world. It's the God's world. So everyone is equal.
Well, yeah, that's the right way to put it. You're from Lithuania, obviously, been boxing since you were very young. Where did your love for fighting come from?
Oh, I started mixed martial arts, so I was winning everything, and then I turned boxing, and I like. It was harder, than mixed martial arts, so that I had to show something, to prove something in boxing. So I like when it's hard, I like, when it's easy, I don't like.
And you had a storied amateur career and represented Lithuania in the U.S. Olympics, and I'm sorry, in the 2016 Olympics. What has been the most difficult part about transitioning from the amateurs to the pros?
For me, I was always professional fighter, because I like more rounds. 3 rounds for me, for my style, is a little bit hard, because other fighters can run from you, and it's hard to catch them in 3 rounds, because they have like stamina for 3 rounds. In the professional boxing is more rounds, so you can, chop your opponent down little by little. So that's what I like about professional.
Eimantas, I have to ask, your English is so good. Is that just from school, or how did that? I mean, it's great, but how did that happen?
No, my English is okay, not very good, but I don't know. It helped me a lot in the games. When I was young, I was playing games and everything was in English, so I learned a lot of words in English. But of course, school, I think, is the most important thing.
Believe me, your English is very good. You're trained by Marvin Samodio, who is mentored by Freddie Roach. Tell us what training with Samodio has been like.
Yeah, I was training before, with Freddie and Marvin. Then I went to the Ronnie, and just I left Ronnie because of the, not that he was a bad trainer or something, but the place just killed me. It's not my place. LA is like more like my place, like in Europe, in my country. So that the one thing that killed me, the Texas was not for me. Just we are all different. So yeah, I went back to LA and I wanted to train with Marvin. He's young, he's motivated, and that's what I need.
When you say LA, I know that you're based in Oxnard, which I know very well. When did you first go there, and how long had you been there?
Never. Only Box Rec showed me like as a
Oh,
Oxnard,
oh, okay. So
Yeah,
so
but
where
I
in
was
where
all
in,
the time in Hollywood.
oh, so near Freddie's gym.
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay. Now I understand. So it sounds like that you like LA, that you're comfortable there.
Yeah, yeah, I like LA and I'm comfortable here.
Very good. Uh, Freddie was impressed with your sparring against Miguel Cotto, which I'm sure you remember.
Yes.
Well, can you describe what that was like sparring with him?
Oh, it was like good experience. And when I was a young kid, I had like my two idols. It was Mike Tyson and Miguel Cotto. Miguel I
Wow.
liked as a person, he was like very calm and very dedicated, and patient. So when I was sparring with him, it was like a dream.
What was the sparring like?
I can't tell you. It's secret. It's secret. Only Fred so you can ask him.
We may have to do that then. Now,
Learning experience, I assume, though.
Yeah, he has very good like experience, different movements, So I like to try new things, and to when you have like different sparring partners, you grow as a fighter.
Very good.
now, as a professional, you've been moved very quickly. Prior to the pandemic, you were scheduled to face, I believe it was Justin Deloach, although you only have 10 fights. Why do you believe you're ready for that kind of step up?
I don't know, I'm just working hard and I want to test myself, how good I am. So I want, big fights. I try to push my manager, my promoters, to give me a bigger and better fight. So they gave me the fight, and of course I always say yes. I never say no. So I was very happy for that fight, but it is what it is. Hopefully we'll fight like soon.
Now, have you heard anything about that fight being rescheduled or when you might return?
Yes, they mentioned something like about August 22nd or September 5th, I think, something like that. Maybe because nobody knows what's going to happen in a week, or two.
Yeah,
Right.
So yeah, hopefully. But the opponent, I think, will be the same, the Loach.
that'd
Oh,
be
good.
great.
Good.
Great.
So you're at 147. Are you comfortable at 147 for a while? I mean, is there any thought of moving up at some point? Where do you stand on that?
I will move up, but my like dream, and I want to be like world champion at 147.
Okay, so that's
So
that's your weight.
yeah, that's my way for now. I don't know, you never know, but for now, yeah, it's 147. But still, I'm growing up. So I'm like late grower, I'm young and I'm still growing.
So you might be a heavyweight one day.
No, not heavyweight, but middleweight maybe.
Okay. Well,
Super welterweight for sure I will be.
very good. So if and when you face Deloach, and assuming you win that fight, how close do you think you are for fighting for a world title?
I think like 3, 4 fights.
Okay. So basically you learned your fundamentals and you learned what you need to learn as an amateur, because that'll be only, I think, how many fights do you have now? Not very many fights.
Oh, in amateur or professional?
Well, I'm saying that you must have learned your fundamentals as an amateur to be able to soon, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Of course, I think I'm ready and I can go there. I see all welterweights, and coming welterweight, and I feel comfortable. I can win a world title. Of course, it's hard road, and you never know what can happen. It's boxing. It's not a game. So, but I'm ready for all bad scenarios.
If you had to pick only one, which welterweight champion would you like to face?
One, I think Keith Thurman.
Oh, that's interesting.
Wow.
What is it about Thurman?
It's nothing. You decide, which one I will pick. So I think Thurman. Like my stylistically, I think it will be like good fight.
Who do you think? Now I'm going to put you on the spot. It's a big question, but who do you think is the best welterweight?
Best, I think like Spence. I think is the best. But of course, the Sean Porter is very close too.
Yeah, that was a great fight.
Yeah.
All right, Eimantas, thanks so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. Best of luck. We hope to have you back soon.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I will come back soon. I'm waiting for the call to get the call from the embassy. When they will open, I will come back.
Fantastic. Looking forward to
Great.
it.
Okay, thank you. Bye bye.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. It's time for Toe to Toe, where Mike and I go back and forth on a select issue or two, and we've got a couple good ones this week. We're going to start with none other than former unified world heavyweight champion Andy Ruiz Jr. Ruiz had quite the 2019, shocking the world with his 7-round drubbing of then undefeated champion Anthony Joshua, and then losing those titles in a matter of months in their rematch. Very disappointing performance from Ruiz. Showed up fairly out of shape, even admitted it afterward. And now Ruiz is on the comeback trail. Mike, can he become a world champion once again?
I think he can. I've always thought that Ruiz was a capable, quick-handed, is what I think of when I think of him, boxer with some power. I've seen him up close at a relatively small venue in Carson, California. He's a good-sized guy, overweight guy, but he could always move. And again, he had those surprisingly quick hands. When you see him like really right next to him, it's like, wow, for that guy's size, he's really impressive. Joseph Parker is a respected guy, and Ruiz gave him all he could handle. Some people thought he won that fight. And he demonstrated what he's capable of against Joshua in that first fight. That wasn't a fluke. He just kicked the crap out of him.
Exactly.
Ruiz is a good fighter, but here's the caveat. That's when he's prepared. The only way Ruiz is going to be successful going forward is if he puts in the work. I mean, it almost sounds like a cliche. That's the challenge for him. Just look at the second Joshua fight. He weighed 283.5 pounds, which is crazy. We've talked about this before. He's working with Eddie Reynoso now. Maybe he'll feed off Canelo Alvarez and Ryan Garcia and the other guys who are devoted to their craft. Ruiz is saying the right things on social media now. He seems to be doing the right things. He weighed 268 for the first Joshua fight. I know I'm dreaming, but I'd like to see him weigh around 245. I think that
wake up.
I know I know I'm dreaming, but in a perfect world, he'd weigh about 245, which would give him enough heft to still, hang with the biggest heavyweights. But he would move extremely well at 245. He's
Sure.
weighed in the 240s before in other
Yes,
fights,
yes. Yeah.
years ago. That would tell me that he's taking everything seriously. If he does take it seriously, I think he can give anybody problems. One last thing, and I'll turn it back to you. I was just thinking, I'm not sure he would have won the second Joshua fight under any circumstances. I think if Joshua fights carefully and boxes like that, I think it would still be really difficult for Ruiz. But what Ruiz did is he didn't give himself a chance in the second fight.
Yeah, yeah. I want to say something with regard to that, but let me preface what I'm going to say with this. Like you, I believe he can become world heavyweight champion once again. But I believe that if he was in shape that night in December, I think he could have beaten Anthony Joshua that night. I thought he had the mental advantage over Joshua. The 1-2 times that he did tag Joshua seemed sort of iffy. Joshua tagged him plenty of times with solid rights. Ruiz didn't go anywhere, but he simply wasn't at his peak. Now, I like him working with Eddie Reynoso, his new trainer. You and I have discussed on the podcast and off the podcast that none of this matters if Ruiz doesn't put in the work himself. But perhaps working alongside guys like Canelo Alvarez, who Reynoso trains, it gives him that sort of motivation. I would love to see Ruiz against Luis Ortiz, see where he's at. Maybe even a Deontay Wilder at some point. I think those are fantastic matchups. And with his skill set, if you add the dedication, he can absolutely become champion again. But big if, though, right?
Yeah, I'd like to see him. We talked about this before. I think Arreola would be a good fight for him to start with.
Yeah, sure.
I like Kovnatsky for him. Maybe Hellenius for him. Luis Ortiz.
I don't know if you saw this, but in an ESPN.com article last week where his father was interviewed, he said they were looking at Chris Arreola in November. So you may get your wish there.
Yeah, well, I think that's the perfect fight for him after what happened against Joshua. Now, I don't know if he's going to fight all four of these guys that I mentioned, but I think 2 or 3 of them maybe. Then I think, he whips himself into shape, he wins some fights, and maybe he comes back and he beats one of the top guys.
Yeah, and I think I like the Arreola fight to sort of see where he's at.
Exactly.
It's funny because we had Arreola on the podcast a few weeks ago, and he's sort of realized what it takes in the latter stages of his career. So he's going to show up and give everything he has. And if Andy Ruiz does not do the same, he's in for a long, long night. And there's some irony in that sort of matchup and where these two guys are coming from. So I would like to see it. I'm hopeful that Ruiz has learned from what transpired in 2019, and we see a new and improved version whenever we see him again in the ring. Now it's time for our second topic. We've got a good one here. We're going to share notes on this one, and it is regarding pound for pound, the top 10 active boxers from the United States. Once again, please note, from the United States. Now, for the purposes of what we did, we're considering guys who may have been born in another country but came here when they were toddlers or extremely young and stayed here. And we're going to go from number 10 to number 1. So, Mike, why don't you start with your number 10?
I feel like we should have a drum roll. This is actually real quick. This was really a lot of fun, and it was harder than I thought it was going to be.
Seriously,
but it was also encouraging because there were so many good fighters who you could argue for to be in the top 10, and a lot of them are young, which is encouraging for the future. So anyway, so here goes.
Let me ask you quick before you begin. Do you remember how many names you came up with initially before you sort of whittled it down?
I could actually tell you. It's like 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, like about 20 guys, 25 guys.
I had 17 and I skipped out on a few. I mean,
I had more than 20 guys, so I think you could, maybe some of them could barely argue for, but I think like 20 guys. And I actually have like 3 more that I wanted to mention after my top 10. So it was hard for me to even get to 13.
Right.
So anyway, ready to roll?
I'm ready.
Number 10 for me is Jose Ramirez. And I think he's sort of number 10. He's sort of like number 1, 2, or 3 waiting to happen. Maybe one's asking a lot, but you get my point. He's got victories over Amir Amin, Antonio Orozco, Jose Zepeda, and Maurice Hooker actually consecutively, those 4 wins. So he's still building his resume, but he's a guy who seems to have it all. I love his, he's got the amateur background, so he's got that technique. I love his ferocity, the way he just goes after people. I think this guy's got a huge future.
Now, I just want to let our listeners know that Mike and I did not share our notes prior to this list. We did not discuss who we had. I have no clue who Mike put on his list. It's the first time I am hearing who he has ranked. Therefore, I am stunned because my number 10 fighter, pound for pound, is undefeated, unified world super lightweight champion Jose Ramirez.
You cheated.
Tapped into your laptop. I mean, you know what? I like this kid a lot. Was an excellent amateur, a U.S. Olympian who I believe is now just starting to come into his own at age 27 under the tutelage of Robert Garcia, who I respect a great deal. I think Ramirez is only going to get better, and he's already an impressive 25-0, 17 knockouts. Again, 2 world titles at 140 pounds. I was so impressed with his TKO win over Maurice Hooker last July.
Really?
And I think he's the world's best 140-pounder. Furthermore, I believe he can grow into formidable welterweight. I don't know what his ceiling is at 147 pounds, but I would like to see more from him there. And hopefully I'd like to see him at 140 pounds some more, because I believe he can clear it out.
Well, there you go. If number 9's the same, then we're really on the same wavelength here.
Oh boy, go for it.
Okay. My number 9 is Teofimo Lopez. I think talent-wise, you could argue that he should be higher than this. I think he's really an unusually talented guy, maybe as much as anybody that we're going to bring up. But he's only 22 years old, and he has a couple of good victories over Diego Magdaleno. Richard Comey win was really, really impressive. So he's definitely just starting his really big rise in boxing. And yeah, it looks like he's going to get this big opportunity against Lomachenko. If he wins that fight, then all bets are off. But number 9, but he's a guy that I'm sure is going to go higher than that.
That's an impressive name. I'm not ready to place him in my top 10 just yet. I think he's on the cusp. I mean, there are a lot of guys who missed my top 10, and he actually falls a notch or two below them. But in terms of potential, he's right there with anybody off on my list. Now, my number 9 is undefeated IBF World Super Middleweight Champion Caleb Sweet Hands Plant. I wouldn't be surprised if Plant is number 1 on this list a year or two from now. He's dedicated to his craft, 27 years old, and is 20-0. He showed everything when he won the title versus Jose Uzcategui in January 2019, and he looks like he's simply improving. The true test obviously will be when he faces fellow undefeated 168-pound champion David Benavidez, who, for the record, just missed my top 10 list. But if he is able to come through that and pass with flying colors, Caleb Plant is probably going to hew closer to number 1 on this list than where he's ranked right now.
It's funny, as I thought of our discussions when I was putting this list together, and I was trying to balance, and this is part of what's difficult. I'm trying to balance the resume against the eye test, what I see. I love what I see with Plant. I mean, to me, it seems like he's got unlimited potential. But I was looking at his resume, and it just didn't have the names. He has the one big name, but beyond that, there isn't too much. Now, I think he's going to succeed, have great success. It's just I'm waiting for it to happen.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do think he has more to show, and I believe he will. All right, let's move to number 8. Mike, who do you have?
Okay, well, this is where the resume comes in, although it also passes the eye test, obviously. And he actually could be higher than this. Jermell Charlo. And just since 2017, he's beaten Erickson Lubin, Austin Trout, lost to Tony Harrison, then he came back and knocked him out. I think he's a guy that's just locked in, talented, focused, fierce, great power. I think he's one of the best fighters in the world, regardless of what country he comes from.
Yeah, I like the Jermell Charlo choice there for number 8. My number 8 is undefeated 2-division world champion Gervonta Tank Davis. Now, by the way, before I get into Tank, you'll see where Jermell is ranked on my list, and I'm listening to this and watching this all unfold, and I think this is going to be very interesting. We're going to have to share more notes after this podcast and talk about it some more. Maybe we can revisit this on another podcast. But anyway, like Plant, I think the sky is the limit for Davis, and he'll likely face another fighter who I have on this list pretty high up there. And if he wins, Tank catapults somewhere near the top spot. He's got speed, power, athleticism. He can box. He can bite down and brawl. He's got flash. In short, he's already a boxing star. Just a couple more wins, and I believe he's on the verge of becoming a crossover star.
What I said about Plant is pretty much what I can say about Davis. That passes the eye test with flying colors, but I'm waiting for him to step up and have the big fights.
I like that. All right, give me your number 7, man.
Number 7 is going to sound a lot like number 8, Jermall Charlo. He has beaten Austin Trout, Julian Williams, Hugo Centeno, Matvey Korobov. He's got a really nice resume. But I think if he's got a problem, and I'm not sure it's a problem, I think he really needs to have a big fight sometime soon. It's been a little while for him. But it's all there. He's got the ability, he's got the power, he's really fun to watch. He's got, as I mentioned, he's got the good resume. I think it's all there. I think he's 1 or 2 victories away from shooting up higher on this list.
Well, my number 7 is undefeated WBC World Middleweight Champion Jermall Charlo. Yet another fighter who could zoom toward this top spot with an impressive win over a top name at 160. He's had a few of those at 154, I think. Guys like Austin Trout and Julian Williams. Charlo is in his prime at 30. He can box, he can bang, he's athletic, he's got every tool in the book and always well conditioned. Hopefully we see him against Chris Eubank Jr. or Sergey Deverenchenko, or even the bigger names like a Gennady Golovkin would be nice sooner rather than later. All right, it's time for number 6. Mike, the floor is yours.
So I wrestled with this one, but I feel okay about it now. Gary Russell Jr. He probably hasn't been as active as he should be. And I'll just remove the word probably. He hasn't been as active as he should be for a guy in his position fighting about once a year, right? But he certainly has the ability, and he's got a pretty good resume. I mean, those hands are just crazy. And he was Olympian. He's got the amateur background too. He's just an exceptional fighter. He's beaten Johnny Gonzalez, Oscar Escandon, Jojo Diaz, who's now a title holder, Kiko Martinez, Naim Bayar in his last fight. But he needs that big name. Maybe you could argue that Diaz is a pretty big name now, but he needs 1 or 2 really big name guys to sort of put him over the hump.
This is starting to get creepy because my number 6 is boxing's longest reigning champion, WBC World Featherweight Champion, Gary Russell Jr. It's hard to believe that Russell's already 32. It seems like it was only yesterday that he was this hotshot phenom with the game's fastest hands, and he may still have the fastest hands in the game to go along with practically every other skill in the book. But I think Mr. Russell needs a defining opponent. He does have some good wins, the guys like Jojo Diaz and Naim Bayar, but perhaps him versus the Tank versus Santa Cruz winner would work, or maybe him versus Chris Colbert at some point. Who knows? But there are some names around there that could make for a good fight, and hopefully we get to see that within the next 12 months. All right, who you got for number 5?
Okay. I was wondering how many more we're going to have the same. Number 5, it might be surprising to some people, but after working this whole thing out, it made sense to me. Sean Porter. Porter is only 6-3 in his last 9 fights, but he has faced a string of elite opponents. That's actually kind of crazy if you look at the guys he's faced in succession. And he could be 9-0 in those fights. That's how close his losses were, including the loss to Spence in that crazy fun fight to watch, the last time they fought. He's got wins over Paulie Malignaggi, Adrian Broner, Andre Berto, Danny Garcia, Yordenis Ugas. So he's got a really strong resume. I love everything about Porter, including his willingness to fight anybody, and he does. A lot of people talk about fighting everybody. This guy does. He's really a special fighter.
I like that name. I struggled with Porter. I struggled with Danny Garcia and some of these other welterweights and where to put them. And I try to deal with the now. Like, where do they stand now? And so with that in mind, I try to steer clear from guys who were coming off a loss, although in Porter's case, that loss did more for him than perhaps a lot of his wins did, and it was a very close fight. But my number 5 is 4-division world champion Leo Santa Cruz. The guy's had a great run, perhaps underappreciated because you know what you're getting from him. He delivers it each time, and I feel like that consistency is often perceived or received by the fans as being monotonous. But Santa Cruz has wins over Abner Maris, Carl Frampton, and I believe if he's able to beat Tank Davis, he becomes a legend, Mike. Now, we're on to number 4 of the top 10 pound-for-pound U.S. boxers today. Mike, who shall it be?
Well, my comment on your choice of Santa Cruz was going to be you'll see how I feel about him in my next choice. At number 4, I have Leo Santa Cruz. For the reasons that you said, basically, 3-division title holder. He's got wins over Eric Morrell, Christian Maharis, Abner Maris twice, Carl Frampton after losing to Frampton first, Kiko Martinez. Strong resume. Going on a title in another weight class if he can get it. I think he nailed it. I think he's a guy he's not splashy, he's not spectacular. He's more like a machine that just gets it done, but he gets it done every single time. I think another special fighter.
I like that pick. Obviously, I just had him one slot below, so I don't think there's too much of a difference. Clearly, he's in the upper echelon of great fighters from the United States. Now let's get to my number 4, another 4-division world champion, Mikey Garcia. Garcia is already a Hall of Famer in my book. At 32, I believe what he's accomplished is phenomenal. I mean, wins over Sergey Lipinets, Adrian Broner, Jesse Vargas, Robert Easter, Orlando Salida, Dejan Zlakanin, on and on and on. Very impressive resume. I don't think he's as good at 147, which sort of hinders him, and that's sort of why he's at number 4 for me and not higher. But he's still a top contender at welterweight, which speaks volumes, I believe, Mike, to his talent, skill, and dedication.
Yeah, I like that choice a lot. I think we're not talking about how he does it at welterweight. We're talking about pound for pound, and I think if he was fighting where he should be fighting, which is probably 140, he'd still be blowing guys out. I think he's at 47 for business reasons, and I think he really likes to challenge himself. Yeah, he did knock out Jesse Vargas. That was a nice win.
Or drop him. You want a decision, but I get what you're saying. It might have well.
I'm sorry. He wanted a decision. I didn't knock him out. He dropped him. That's what I meant. But the fight against Spence, that was a bad look. He took a big swing and he missed big time. But if you could just set that aside and see what he's done beyond that, he's just another special guy.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I love watching Mikey fight, and I'm curious to see how the rest of his career pans out. Now we're inching closer to number 1. Mike, who do you have for number 3?
Well, Mikey Garcia. So I don't really need to say much more than I just said. Total stud. Maybe not at 147, but pound for pound.
Okay. Now my number 3 is undefeated WBO World Welterweight titleist Terrence Bud Crawford. Simply incredible accomplishments for Crawford. Titles at 135, undisputed, at 140, and now he has a belt at 147. He can box lefty or righty. He's a great athlete, hard worker in the gym. Some days he reminds me of Pernod Whitaker. Other days I think of Aaron Pryor. Obviously, he needs some better names on his resume so we can truly see how great he is, but I'd say he's doing pretty damn good as it stands right now, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I could quibble and say I can't see how he could be lower than number 2, but number 3 is pretty darn close. I think he's an incredible fighter. I think I have him number 2 on my personal pound for pound list behind Lomachenko. He could do it all, but I hear you, and I think you bring up a legitimate criticism. He doesn't have the best resume. Maybe we're relying a little bit more on eye test, or a lot more on the eye test with him, but he's an incredible fighter. I just hope he gets those big fights. It would really be a shame if he finished his career without fighting the top guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you said, number 3 on that list speaks to what he's accomplished so far. Now let's get to number 2, Mike. Who do you have?
So number 2, I guess it wouldn't be too much of a surprise after what we just talked about. Number 2 for me is Errol Spence Jr. Has all the tools in the world. He's building a really strong resume. He's beaten Kell Brook, Lamont Peterson, Mikey Garcia, Sean Porter. He wants to fight Danny Garcia, Manny Pacquiao, and Crawford. Tremendously talented guy, can do it all, including fighting the other guy's style and still win. If he can fight these guys that he's talking about fighting and beat these guys, then you got to put him at number one. So we'll see how things play out, but just unlimited respect for Errol Spence Jr.
Absolutely, I agree with you as far as the unlimited respect for Errol Spence Jr. It's interesting. My number two, number one, I realize haven't left their divisions. My number two hasn't moved up at all. He's been in his weight class for a long time, and I believe could potentially become the greatest fighter ever in that class if he can clean it out, and that's WBC World Super Welterweight Champion Jermell Charlo. Jermell is 30 years old, so he's at his physical peak right now. He's always in shape. He can box, he can bang, he takes a good shot, he's durable, and I think his determination sets him apart from the pack. Does he have a better resume than Mikey Garcia? Maybe not, but I would take him at 154 over Mikey at 147, perhaps over Mikey, period. I think that Jermell, he's just a born super welterweight. He's so perfect for that class. And his resume is pretty damn impressive, too. Just, I just want to throw that out there from back in the day when he beat Gabriel Rosado and Vanes Martirosyan to Erickson Lubin, Austin Trout, and of course, the thrilling KO victory over Tony Harrison in their rematch last December. Look, if he can unify versus Jason Rosario, beat a Jarrett Hurd, Julian Williams, perhaps a Patrick Teixeira and or Brian Castano, you may be looking at the greatest 154-pounder ever.
I like your the boldness of putting him at number two. That's a little bit unexpected. I may actually second guessing myself having him as low as I do. I like him a lot as a fighter. I really do. And it's the attitude is a big part of it. I keep saying he's locked in. He's just this ferocious, focused guy who just has got this crazy amount of confidence and just goes out and kicks people's asses. I just love that about him. So I won't be surprised if he just continues to win big fights and moves up this list. A question for you though. I mean, I've always been on recently, not always, it's only been the last several years that I think most boxing people think that Jermall is better than Jermell. Is that not your impression? That was always my impression. I'm not saying I always felt that way, but I always got that impression from people.
It's interesting. I think that Jermall may be more athletic than Jermell, but I think Jermell started boxing a little earlier, and therefore he has the better technical background, the better skill set. And I don't know. It's a great question. They're both so similar, but I like what Jermell is doing at 154. Me too. He stayed there. They both are on the same route now. Jermell obviously has that great win over Julian J. Rock Williams, but Jermell is still there. He's got some really, really good wins under his belt, and I think he's on the cusp. Look, it's possible that he may face Jason Rosario next, and that fight could send him leaping toward the top of the boxing elite, but I believe he's already there. I was so impressed by what he did against Tony Harrison.
Me too.
He scored that knockdown early on, but Harrison really came back, battled. He was winning a lot of those rounds in the middle rounds, I thought, and he was backing Charlo up. And Charlo made adjustments in there that I thought were really impressive. And knockout aside, he had been, for the 3 rounds prior to the knockout, the way he worked his way back into the fight and sort of took control, I thought he showed so much in that one fight against a seriously motivated, determined Tony Harrison that night that I think he deserves this spot. I'd like to see Jermall fight some of the other top 160-pounders, which we have not seen yet. So until then, I'm rocking with Jermell, but that could change in a matter of months. So I guess we'll see what happens.
Interesting.
Now I have a feeling I know who your number one is. Just get to it. I already know who it is.
It's a little anticlimactic, isn't it? I said what I said about Terrence Crawford. I just, here's the thing also for me is, and maybe this almost taints my view, I don't know, but I think he's probably my favorite fighter to watch too. to me, that's part of it. These guys don't fight in a vacuum. Part of it is the exchange with the people watching them fight. And I just love watching Crawford fight. He's got it all. And I don't know. It's even hard for me to put into words. He can box, he can punch. I love his kill. When he's got somebody hurt, just stand by. He's got incredible killer instinct. I don't know, and he's got a good resume. Well, he doesn't have a great resume, as we discussed earlier, right? That's sort of what's missing. But he's got a pretty good resume. He's beaten some good guys: Gamboa, Ray Beltran, Thomas Delorme, Hank Lundy, Victor Postol, John Molina, Indongo, Horn, Benavides, Khan. These aren't elite guys, so we're sort of waiting for that. But they're all good fighters, and he kicked all their asses. I think what he's done is good enough to gauge how good he is in my eyes.
I think Crawford does have a good resume simply because he's been able to maneuver through divisions and beat a lot of decent fighters, I think, in the higher weights. I love John Molina, but I mean, he never won a world title.
No,
I don't.
John Molina's an overachiever, yeah.
Right. Thomas Delorme, and so forth. Those are decent fighters as far as I'm concerned. Now, Gamboa was a good fighter, but he hadn't fought in 13 months and he was moving up 2 divisions.
Exactly.
It doesn't blow me away. I don't want to take anything away from Terence Crawford. I do think he's a pound for pounder. I do think he's a great fighter. Heck, I think he's a Hall of Famer. However, I'm not ready to place him that high when if we talk best wins and you got to bring up Julius Indongo, that settles it as far as I'm concerned. Now, my number one has not moved through weight divisions, but I believe he has a better resume than Terence Crawford. Has already beaten better fighters. In fact, I think he's beaten several fighters who could beat everyone on Terence Crawford's resume. And of course, I'm speaking to none other than the truth, undefeated, unified world welterweight champion, Errol Spence Jr., a truly special fighter from the amateur to the pros. I mean, if this was football, this guy would be considered an All-American. 2012 U.S. Olympian, and he's been moved fairly quickly, if you think about it, as a pro, and he's showing no signs of slowing down. Of course, we know about that serious car accident that occurred last October, which derailed what would have been a great fight versus Danny Garcia in January, and it looks like he wants to jump right back in with Danny Garcia when he returns. Now, besides that, you look at his resume, nothing short of impressive, from Sean Porter to Kell Brook to Mikey Garcia to Lamont Peterson. Spence is my guy, Mike. I just think pound for pound, head to head at his best, I think I'd pick him to beat any fighter head to head.
Could be. I think that I would, at this moment, and you know me, I usually just go with my gut right when I hear a fight is made, and although it hasn't been made, I think I'd pick him over Crawford at 147. But that's because I think he's a more natural welterweight, and I think he's just a bigger, stronger guy. He's got a good resume. I also love watching this guy fight. I mean, you know what? It's almost 6 of one, a half a dozen of the other, to me, honestly, between those two. Hopefully they'll fight and make the determination that way.
Yeah, hopefully we get that on. So many great welterweight fights that have happened, but so many more that could happen. And I'm thirsty. Boxing is back. No more excuses. Let's make them all go down. All right, that concludes this week's Toe to Toe segment. As always, please share your thoughts on social media. Let us know how right or wrong you think we are. That's it for today's show. We want to thank Eimantas Stanionis for joining us. We want to thank you for listening. Please check us out again next week for more boxing talk right here on the PBC podcast.